And if there's somebody loud from that side of the room that wants to herd people in, there are a lot of people still in the hall, you know. Yeah. So while we're getting people in, I had a couple of quick announcements. One, if you're participating in Research's Art, the setup is going to be from 12:30 to 1:30, so during lunch. If you can go over to 21C with your material, that would be super. Another question that came up over the last couple of days, or the last, feels like a couple of days, yesterday, is about Funding Friday. So I wanted to give just a little bit of background on Funding Friday. Funding Friday is really an incentive to get all of you talking, and it's to incentivize the idea creation and lower the barrier to starting up some of the ideas that come up when we have conversations in the hallway. You know, I have this great idea about, you know, could you identify air quality events from Twitter that came up at the meeting, and, you know, a little bit of seed funding makes that happen. So one of the things that we do, that we started doing, is on Thursday night we have the poster making session. It's not a requirement to go to that session, but it's highly encouraged. It's a fun time to see what other people are doing, and just get an idea of sort of more about Funding Friday. I wonder if anybody has any questions about Funding Friday. And then there'll be 3 prizes for member organizations, for the people that are, you know, members and participants of ESIP, and then there are going to be 4 student fellow or student prizes. You don't have to be a student fellow to win for that, and that's because of some of the sponsorship that we got for the meeting. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Emily, unless there are any other just generally questions. Thanks for coming back, guys. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us really early this morning, and welcome to the second day of the meeting. I hope you all had a great time yesterday, and that you had a good night's sleep and ready for today. Okay. First, I think there's here we are today, the second day. Just a quick reminder that we do have the State of the Federations and Collaboration posters on the hall there, and the chairs and the leads will be sending by them tomorrow morning, I believe. So check them out, and if you have questions, talk to them. And we also have tables identified for different groups, so that, you know, if you're interested in those groups, then go and talk to those folks there. Let's see. Today we'll start with a special plenary session, and we have a great lineup of wonderful speakers with us today. We also have a presentation that will be delivered by this year's Raskin scholar, as well as 3 fantastic plenary speakers sitting over there. And after each talk, we'll have a Q&A, Aaron or Danny would run the mic up to you, so to make sure that all the audience would hear your questions clearly. And then after the morning break, and we'll have another interesting lighting talks, so don't miss that. And also don't forget that we'll have our first Research as Art event this evening. The event is about showing the diversity of the research being done by this community in using and sharing data, as well as the impact of the research, using artistic as well as engaging the media. So that's going to be really fun. Come and marvel at your ESIP colleagues, artistry as well as creativity. Enjoy the evening, have some nice conversations, some new folks, some new connections, and also reach out to the first time attendees and make sure that they are welcome. Also, food and drink will be served, which we have as we thank for as the sponsor of this evening's event. Raskin Scholarship to a graduate or postgraduate student in either science or computer science. All the students have this common interest in community evolutions and also involvement in science and computer systems. And the students will be a big part of ESIP. The program is really impacting and benefits the student, but it really benefits the community at large. And we will have a 2017 call for the student fellows as well as the 2017 Raskin Scholarship later this summer. So just to keep it going. And I would I would like to thank the Preston family for the scholarship, which is named after the long-term ESIP member, Robert Raskin, who was a leader in our community, and all of us had a great opportunity and pleasure to work with him. So here are the faces of this year's fellow students. And I would like to give a big shout out to them. I think they all here. Great. And among them should be Sean. I'm not sure if Sean is in here. Sean Barry. I had at a last winter's meeting, 2015 winter's meetings, and I had the pleasure to offer him the opportunity of this summer internship at JPL, and then that he was working on my project, and that's just worked out really well, and it was a wonderful experience for both of us. I really love all the fellow students, or student fellows. For those who have interacted with them, will already know that they are just intelligent, fun, and fun to be with, great to talk with. So see them out and learn firsthand how bright and smart and also wonderful they are. And also thanks them for their service and also support throughout the years as well as your sessions today and tomorrow. The amount of energy, creativity, and also the fresh idea they bring to ESIP are just incredible. So they're really important to us and really a huge part of our future. So the Raskin Scholarship is meant to promote collaboration, research support, and also to give visibility to talented students who have high potentials. To qualify for the scholarship, the student must have shown strong interest in community advancement and building in the area of earth science leader systems. And this year's award is given to Amanda Weigle. So congratulations, Amanda. For those who doesn't know her, Amanda is a science research associate working for the Information Technology and Systems Center in the University of Evansville, Alabama. She works closely with the Global Hydrology Research Center, Distributed Archive, Active Archive Center, commonly known as the GHRC. Her research is really interesting. Centers on the geospatial modeling of natural hazards and atmosphere interaction triggered by tornadoes. She is currently involved in NASA's efforts on climate data initiative project led by the White House OSTP, Office of Technology Science Policy, focusing on the collaborative development of data models and the faceted classification scheme for the human health. She is also working towards a PhD degree in atmospheric science to further her research in the integration of atmospheric data and geospatial sciences. Amanda's diverse skill sets and also research experience have given us unique and valuable insights into the needs and the use of earth science data. She has a really strong interest in including collaborations among the earth science geeks or professional like you and I. So I'm really thrilled that she is a recipient of this year's Raskin Scholarship, really well deserved. And I have heard a lot of good things about Amanda. She's really well respected among her colleagues and friends. She has great attitudes and a pleasure to work with. And on a personal note, I heard that she is a devoted mom to two big black girls. So welcome, Amanda. Please just welcoming Amanda. Hello, everyone. I am Amanda Weigle. As was just mentioned, I work for the Information Technology Systems Center at UAH, and I'm also finishing off the last portions of my master's in Earth System Science. So I'll be presenting my master's thesis work today, which was a spatial pattern analysis of land surface heterogeneity and its relationship to tornado genesis. So during this presentation, I'll provide you with some general background and the research objectives for this work, as well as overviewing the data, methods, and results found. So Alabama has the highest frequency of recorded EF4 through 5 tornadoes, and within this area, North Alabama has been identified as one of the most at-risk areas in the United States. So this area has had a violent history of severe weather and tornadoes, and been impacted by some of the most prolific tornado outbreaks in U.S. history, including the 1974 super outbreak and the April 27th, 2011 outbreak. Now, during these events, there have been spatial patterns of tornado occurrences, which have been qualitatively observed by the public meteorologists. However, it's unknown why these areas are so frequently hit. One theory out there is that this could be due to the effects of the underlying land surface features. However, little research has been done to investigate these relationships. So within the realm of atmospheric science, roughness length is the common parameter used to quantify variations in the land surface. So roughness length is essentially a portion of the logarithmic wind profile. So taking a look to the schematic on the right, we have a plot of various land surface features. So we have buildings to the far left and then grasslands to the far right. So as you can see, as the height of the feature increases, it affects the distribution or the logarithmic wind profile. Now within this, the roughness length, which is using that value, is the height at which this mean wind becomes zero. And this value is commonly used to help quantify turbulence and heat fluxes over the surface. Preliminary laboratory analyses and models have found that variations in the surface roughness may actually induce cyclonic motion or induce sporadic flow of the surface. So the theory has recently been developed that horizontal gradients in roughness length normal to the direction of motion could induce this cyclonic or counterclockwise motion at the surface. So taking a look at the schematic, to the top we have a forested area which has a higher roughness compared to the bottom grassland area. So there is a northward directed gradient along these differences. So this gradient causes counterclockwise motion, which is tornadic-like motion. So this research generally tests the hypothesis that areas of higher roughness lengths are located to the left of tornado genesis locations relative to their direction of motion. So this research had 4 objectives. One is to quantify roughness length using remotely assessed land surface parameters, providing a continuous layer for assessment. 2, develop an automated methodology for assessing these variations in both spatial patterns and scales surrounding each roughness for each genesis location. Thirdly, to statistically quantify these variations, and finally, investigate relative roughness variations surrounding low-intensity tornadoes. So the study area for this analysis was centered around advanced radar for meteorological and operational research armor with a 120-kilometer radial coverage area spanning across Alabama, Tennessee, and a small portion of Georgia. The study period ranged from 2005 to 2014 during the peak Alabama climatological season from March to May. Several data sets were selected for this analysis. Primarily, they were selected to one, represent the tornadic events as well as the land cover. So 3 tornado data sets were selected. They were cross-validated and used for processing, and then 2 land cover data sets and vegetation indices were selected and able to allow comparison between higher resolution 30-meter and coarse resolution 500-meter data. So it must be noted, in order to compare similar land cover classes, the land cover parameters are based off the National Land Cover Data Set classification years of 2006 and 2011. So the corresponding years were mapped to each of these time periods for the tornadic events. Now, for the land cover data, the MODIS data is classified according to the International Geobiosphere Program scheme, whereas the NLCD data is classified according to the traditional Anderson classification scheme. Indices, the normalized difference vegetation index was selected, which is generally a ratio between the near infrared reflectance and red reflectance. So a total of 286 Landsat scenes were collected for the study area and 46 terabytes images. The data set used in this analysis was for the armor radar tornado event and maintained by the UAH Atmospheric Science Civil Weather Research Group. So taking a look to the map to the right, we have a plot of the density of tornado genesis events. As you can see, there is a higher frequency clustering of events towards the northwest of the armor radar location and east. These events, the majority occurred during the month of April, and the year of 2011, the most recent super outbreak occurred. Finally, most of the tornadoes within the database were with 0 to 5 in intensity, and their orientation generally followed a southwest to northeast direction of movement at 45 degrees. Methodology of this research was processing, which required any pre-processing and quality assessment, as well as parameterization, and then the analysis portion. I'm briefly going to gloss over the methods used for this research. So for the remotely assessed land cover data, it would undergo extensive quality control measures to remove any erroneous pixels. The tornado data sets were used, they were cross-compared between the armor and severe GIS data sets to remove any anomalous entries. And finally, it was necessary to correct for the April 27th, 2011 tornado outbreak. So taking a look to the image to the right, you can see a tornado scar left by the specifically the tornado in Alabama. Now, these scars and change underlying land surface as well. So it's necessary to identify tornado events within the 2011 tornado group that intersected these areas because the underlying roughness values would be changed and not representative. So this process ended up reducing the sample size to 160 tornado genesis events. Now, a core portion of this was parameterizing the momentum roughness link. This research implements the NOAA land surface model parameterization scheme, which has been applied across various atmospheric modeling applications. It traditionally requires 2 types of roughness links, but for the sake of this research, we'll be focusing on the momentum roughness link, seen on M. This methodology requires 2 inputs, which is your general land cover of the area as well as a local NDVI. So taking a look at the flow chart to the right, the NDVI land are used to derive two key components, and that is a annual land cover class maximum NDVI value, as well as developing a spring NDVI layer. For the spring NDVI layer, it was created by taking all of the NDVI imagery that fell within the March through May spring period. The maximum of these values was collected. This was due to the majority of the NDVI data was skewed towards the beginning months of the study period through March before the peak cleanup period. In addition, the majority of the tornado genesis events occurred to the latter half of the study period after the peak geological cleanup period. So in order to better represent the higher NDVI values, the maximum value for the study area was calculated. And finally, this layer was used to derive the green vegetation fraction, which is a measure of the fractional vegetation cover per pixel. It uses the developed NDVI layer and scales it based off the default layer soil value of 0.10, and then we calculated maximum NDVI value for each land cover class that was analyzed across the study area. So with this GBF value, a lookup table was used that provides seasonal ranges in momentum roughness length values for each land cover class. The GBF value was used to scale these to identify the per pixel momentum roughness length at that state in time. So taking a look at the two images to the right, the left image is the MODIS momentum roughness length, where on the right is the Landsat. So you can see that the Landsat picks up more variation. This is due to the higher resolution, whereas the MODIS data shows more general characteristics. Now, following this parameterization scheme, a general spatial analysis was conducted. It was separated into two parts. One involved a quadrant analysis, which was used to assess differences between different various roughness lengths in the area, as well as quantitatively assessing those relationships and patterns. And secondly, a Fishnet analysis was instituted to provide a qualitative visualization of Z0 M values, comparing both the MODIS and Landsat data across equal scales. Now, for the quadrant analysis, going back to the initial theory of this work, the flow direction for this analysis, due to lack of data, this analysis assumes that the direction of movement is based on the tornado track orientation. So this is essentially the bearing or the degrees off north of the tornado track within the database move. So after calculating this information, different coordinates along this oriented line were derived. And so along this line, they were iterated out to a distance of 4,000 meters using 500-meter increments. And after plotting these locations and creating lines, each of these lines were buffered out to the same to a radial distance using 500-meter increments to a maximum of 4,000 meters. So this enabled the development of a series of quadrants around each initiation point, depicted here in green, at various spatial scales and sizes. Similarly, a Fishnet analysis was conducted. What was done here was a track-oriented Fishnet was created around each tornado genesis location and rotated using the bearing or the orientation of each of the tornado tracks. So this ended up creating a series of 256 grid cells surrounding each tornado genesis location, each with a dimension of 500 by 500 meters. Now, before we get into the results of this analysis, I wanted to provide you with an overview of the spatial statistics. So here we have a set of tornado genesis locations. Each of these, you can see, has a location in green, and then their relative track orientation or direction of movement with a black arrow. Surrounding each has a grid cell. Now, with the black dot indicates corresponding locations within the grid. So I'm running these statistics for each tornado event. The sample roughness length was assessed. So the mean roughness length for each location was calculated in order to allow an entire representation representation of all the data within the analysis. So taking a look at the first result. So this is a comparison matrix. Here we have two dots plotted. One dot is that 500 by 500 meters, and the second is that 4,000 by 4,000 meters. Now the corresponding information for this plot is that the 500 by 500 meter quadrant samples all the pixels of roughness length within that area, and then conversely the 4,000 by 4,000 meter calculates the mean roughness length within that larger region. So it allows all of the quadrants sampled for this preliminary analysis to be visualized in one plot. So looking at these, we can see two general patterns. On the left, we have the MODIS data. On the right, we have the Landsat. Generally, we see a drop in momentum leftist length in the forward right quadrants for both the MODIS and Landsat data. However, the Landsat data is more distinct and linear in pattern. Now here's the Fishnet analysis. Again, this is an equal area grid sampled over the MODIS on the right and the the MODIS on the left and the Landsat on the right. So this allowed values to be sampled within the equal 500 meter grid cells surrounding each tornado during a station in order to compare both the Landsat and the MODIS data. As we can see, this is still the same pattern emerges in that forward right-hand quadrant. There's a drop in momentum roughness length. And for the Landsat data, the features are more linear and discrete. Now, finally, this just points out qualitative features, so it's necessary to go in and try and quantify these relationships. So the pattern analysis addresses two key concerns. One is what observed patterns in momentum roughness length are statistically significant, and then at what spatial scales are these patterns statistically significant? So the pattern analysis was run as follows. So across the quadrants, there are 6 possible quadrant pattern combinations that can be assessed across the 8 spatial scales, ranging from 500 meters to 4,000 meters from the initiation point. Within these patterns, there were separated into 2 quadrant groups, A in light blue and B in dark blue. Now, within each of these total quadrant groups, the zone statistics were used to solve for the mean Z0 and values for each of these groups separately. Then, in order to compare these, the difference was taken to express these relationships. Now, the difference was taken over the mean because in some cases there are very low roughness lengths of 0 to 0.0001. So by dividing that and taking a relationship would yield undefined values. And here's the results of the first pattern analysis run on the MODIS data. So we have 6 plots here showing the 6 possible pattern combinations. Each of these lines denotes the distribution of 160 tornado events in the data set and their difference. So the more clustered around 0 these values are, means that there's less difference between each of the pattern groups. So what we're seeing here is that most of the values for the MODIS data are found to be clustered around 0. We do notice a peak in more tightly clustered values at 500 meters. This is likely due to the spatial resolution of the 500 meter data, because it's 500 meters at a distance of 500 meters out, you're not going to see much variation in the values analyzed. So it was found that this MODIS data may not be useful for studying these patterns within the area sampled. For the Landsat data, we see a slightly different distribution. Again, here are the 6 different patterns and the corresponding scales assessed. At the 500 meters values, we're starting to see that the distribution appears to take on more skewness. This skewness means that the values, there may be more of a statistically significant relationship, and as well, the wider distribution shows that there's more variability observed. But what we can take from this is that 30-meter Landsat data is more useful in studying these spatial patterns than the 500-meter data. Now, as a subset of this analysis, we honed in on the low-intensity tornadoes. Now, low-intensity tornadoes are thought to be more sensitive to land surface variation than high-magnitude tornadoes. This is because the high-magnitude tornadoes are more likely to be influenced by driving atmospheric conditions. Now, according to the National Severe Storm Laboratory, the tornadoes were classified as EF0 through 5. These were extracted from the total data set, leaving a total of 125 tornadoes that were analyzed using the Landsat data. So skipping over the comparison matrix and just taking a look at the Fishnet analysis, again, for the EF0 through 1 tornadoes, we're noting a similar pattern as the full data set, where there's this drop in momentum roughness links to the forward right-hand quadrant. And again, that linear decrease in Z.M values near each tornado genesis location. And running the same pattern analysis, again, we have the 6 different patterns, and this was used to plot the relative variations of EF0 through 1 tornadoes. Now, what we have here is for at 500 meters, we're still getting that same general skewness in the distribution of the differences of the pattern groups. However, what must be noticed is that now at 4,000 meters at a larger scale, we're seeing that the values between the pattern groups are more widely distributed and appear to be taking on more skewness. So in order to investigate if these are statistically significant findings, several statistics were calculated to describe the distribution of the data, and these included the mean, standard deviation, and skewness. To assess the statistics or the significance, a two-tailed t-test was conducted to identify patterns and at what spatial scale represented a statistically significant difference. So for this analysis, a p-value statistic or significance level of 0.05 was set. So the values below that are deemed statistically significant. Now here's just a subset of the results, and there were 2 findings. For pattern 1, shown at the bottom at a spatial scale of 500 meters, it was shown that there was a statistically significant difference between pattern group A in light blue and B in dark blue. So areas in the light blue were found to be higher than areas in the dark blue. And conversely, at a larger scale of 4,000 meters, it was found that the areas in the light blue to the left are generally higher to the right. Now, this is very interesting because it supports the initial theory that was tested in this research. Now, in summary, momentum roughness length was used to was quantified using the NOAA land surface parameterization scheme. A GIS-based spatial pattern analysis was conducted and automated in GIS using Python. In addition, this analysis was performed to statistically quantify these spatial patterns. And then finally, the EF0 through 1 tornadoes were further investigated as they're likely to be more sensitive to land surface variation. Finally, I'd just like to discuss some computational challenges in this work. Now, Python was used as the primary tool to develop and automate this methodology. One thing that was required was very efficient programming and data management as we were working with high-resolution data across a large geographic extent. So it was necessary to apply data type convergence, scaling, and tiling in order to even run this analysis for each tornado genesis event. Then finally, this is a geospatial analysis, and the primary software used was ArcPy, but it was necessary to combine several other resources and implement general scientific array-based analysis. So combining elements of GDAL, NumPy, and SciPy in order to make this iterative automated process viable. So in future work, this analysis will be extended to examine other spatial scales, incorporate and investigate other remote sensing approaches to quantify roughness lengths such as SAR and LiDAR, and then incorporate topographic information, as well as investigating dynamic interactions between the land and atmospheric events. Later findings can be used to help improve severe weather forecasts, as well as create tornado susceptibility maps to enhance severe weather preparedness. So in conclusion, both the MODIS and Landsat data sets capture similar results. However, Landsat data was able to capture more variation in the surrounding land surface. Distinct patterns and roughness were observed for the low-intensity tornadoes, primarily at 500 meters and 4,000 meter spatial scales. So finally, I'd just like to acknowledge my commitment community, family, friends, fellow graduate students, and my GHRC coworkers who have supported me through this process. All right. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Any questions from the audience or from the remote folks? I actually,
are there any like station planners or like urban planners, or are those types of folks kind of looking at your research right now to look at how can I be used to plan for the growth of society in urban areas, etc.
yes, the main group I interacted with for this research was the National Weather Service, specifically for this location where these patterns are observed. They'd like to know why this is occurring. It's not known right now. They think it could be the land surface. So by having that information, it will help them improve forecasts as well.
I was wondering also, is this kind of research prompted people to think of how to change the land surface, kind of human changes that might change the roughness that you're looking at by either planting more trees or taking down some trees or something like this?
Yeah, it hasn't gone that far yet. Like I said, there's been very little research conducted in this area, and I'm one of the first people to start to look at this. A lot of the approaches have been modeling based, so in the future that could be an option to protect certain areas.
Your slide on computational challenges was perfect and rarely seen in science talk. I was wondering with all of your research and hard work and that's an excellent presentation, how do you see the curation of that information happening, agencies will go to for long term and for reuse by others?
Yeah, so this research was very interesting. I was traditionally trained in geography and meteorology, so it's been interesting learning that perspective of things and then the atmospheric science, so trying to pull that information together. I think in the future, one approach is just making methods and resources available to unfamiliar users so that they can immediately access the key publications, methodologies, data, and approaches used by our scientists in different subject areas.
Natural topography effects versus man-made features.
No, within the land cover class, it had both your urban and your agricultural areas that are more influenced by humans. All of that information was in the land cover. However, it was not compared against each other, natural versus man-made.
Hi, excellent work. Rama, maybe you're talking about the same idea that I am, which is, natural, I think. What I was the way I was going to characterize it was visual elevation, because I know around the flat area there are mountains, it's kind of, so that
future work, the same codes and scripts can actually be run on topography as well. It's just changing the model inputs and assessing those variations versus the land surface variation. Okay. And I think I've just been told one more question, so feel free to come talk to me afterwards. Thank you. Years, selected this year's overarching theme with ESIP strategic goals and plans in mind. So the topics related to this themes are touched by a variety of activities carried out by this community. So for example, the Information Technology and Interoperability Committee held a number of technology showcases, and we also participated in data.gov data roundtable discussions about the big data issues, and also help organize the Earth Science Big Data Workshop. We'll have a strong presence in the International Data Week coming up, and also at the HU, and we'll share stories at the HU blog. So next you will hear 3 talks about different stories, different aspects of science and communications with regard to large amount of Earth science data. So I hope there will be many takeaways from the stories, and the talk will undoubtedly set the stage for you to carry on future conversation around this theme and in the remaining meeting as well as beyond that. So our first plenary speaker is Dr. Preston. Ben is a senior research scientist in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where he also acts as the deputy director of Polar Analysis Climate Change Science Institute. Ben is also the recipient of the most recent prestigious HU Falkenberg Award. Ben is an expert in working with impacts on the energy grid from extreme weather events due to climate change. And his research over 15 years has focused on enhancing understanding of climate change impacts, adaptation, vulnerability, and working across the science policy boundary. Ben is very interested in applying research and also research tools to the decision-making processes needed to deal with extreme events. The trends in extreme events are pretty amazing. And Polar he is helping to be the ways through large-scale computing and leveraging more than 100 scientists in focusing the research itself on very important questions such as how changes of climate and climate extremes impacts the energy sector, the energy system, and the critical infrastructure, and much more. He is well recognized for his efforts in science engagement, communications with the media, community, organization, policymakers, and students as well. Just this past January, Ben was the speaker at the Weather and Climate Summit in the Breckenridge, Colorado, where he gave an excellent talk about climate change impacts in the energy system. So let's give him a warm welcome, Dr. Preston.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks for the invitation to be here. This talk, I'm going to borrow some from the talk I gave back in Breckenridge and then Gerber. summit, which if you aren't familiar with, really brings the sort of broadcast meteorology community together with the sort of climate and weather research community. And for me, that was a fun experience in a nice location. So today I'm going to talk a bit about sort of a high level about these sort of interactions between climate, energy, challenges for resilience, and the role of earth science information. And all that, but also I want to start again talking about the sort of new initiative we're moving forward with at Oak Ridge National Laboratory to try and address some challenges, particularly around the energy-water nexus, which is a hot topic, I think, across the U.S. Before I get into that, though, I feel the need to issue a caveat to some extent. So I'm going to assume that there's sort of two types of people in the room. There's those of you whose careers are revolved around earth science information and big data and trying to make big data even bigger and use it effectively. And there's another type which are sort of the newcomers to this enterprise, and I'm certainly one of those people. So I started out my career 20 years ago this year in environmental toxicology. I worked in the laboratory doing laboratory-based toxicity testing. So if I had 30, 40, 50 data points, I was patting myself on the back and really excited about the statistics I could do around that. Right? Now I'm working often at regional scales, global scales. I put the field in quotes because I don't like to run the field work, but basically taking information, data, knowledge from the real world and trying to figure out that it integrates together. I'm working in the climate domain, which means we're using Earth system model simulations. We're also bringing in information on demography, infrastructure, the economy. We're trying to get large samples or ensembles of consequences of climate change, say disaster losses or energy impacts. And so there's a really big scale divide. And I wasn't trained as a biologist in graduate school to work with large data volumes. Fortunately, I've got lots of people who are trained and how to do this. But the point here is one of the practicing thing I say with that caveat that I was talking about. But two, there are a lot of folks like this. I think increasingly many of us in the research community, broader society, industry are now waking up to the realities of the opportunities of using data and information, whether it's from earth sciences or elsewhere, but also the challenges inherent in that. And so part of the challenge for us is to figure out how we can make that easier. Okay. So with that said, talking about energy, so I think the energy spectrum is kind of interesting. I've been working on climate change impacts for 50 odd years. And typically when we talk about climate change, the typical impacts come out for things like impacts to agriculture, impacts to water resources, a bit on human health. The energy sector has largely been looked at as the cause of climate change, and less consideration has gone into what does climate change actually mean in terms of consequences for energy. This sector makes about 6% of U.S. GDP. We make large investments every year in this. And energy sector obviously supports a lot of other sectors that we are interested in. So at a high level, we're concerned about interactions between climate change, extreme weather, and energy supply, including refrigeration, transmission, energy demand, and some data looking at what happens when you have a heat wave, energy demand, risks of catastrophic failures. So what would happen if you, for some reason, weren't able to cool a nuclear power plant? Lots of safeguards in place for good reason, but one of the things to look at. And an interesting area which we really haven't even gotten into, which is the risk of maladaptation. So are we doing things to manage the risk of climate change that actually have adverse consequences for you, the energy sector, or for other sectors as well? So what kinds of things are we talking about? So just what we've observed in recent years, the past decade, in terms of sort of impacts of particularly extreme weather events and natural climate variability on the energy system. There's a whole list of consequences we've seen, some impacts on oil and gas exploration, fuel transport, generation of electricity is one of the biggest concerns perhaps of the sector of utilities. We're doing work on bioenergy creation, and I'm waiting work right now to look at what implications of a changing climate for bioenergy resources around the U.S., as well as other renewables. We're also doing work on energy grid, thinking about how we modernize the grid and make it more resilient. And again, as I mentioned, issues with energy demand. So there's this nice study that's done by the Department of Energy a couple of years ago, and it sort of maps out some of the impacts we've already observed in recent years, and some of these are things like power plants having to shut down or scale back their generation because either they don't have enough water because of the drought, or because the water temperature is too high and therefore exceeds sort of EPA limits. And then we also see big hurricane events that typically have adverse effects on transmission and distribution. And so there's a whole litany, and the important point is to cover the entire country, right? So different impacts to different areas, but this is sort of a national issue. And so we'll dig into a couple of examples. So obviously, hurricane Katrina is now 10 plus years in the rearview mirror, but still had a lasting impact, I think, particularly on the energy sector along the Gulf Coast and elsewhere. And Hurricane Sandy, I think, was a reminder for the eastern seaboard. So what we saw with that event was, wide-scale impacts to not only onshore infrastructure, but offshore oil and gas drilling, refineries along the Gulf Coast, the ports and pipelines, power plants, transmission distribution. So we saw refineries flooded and offline for months. We saw power plants flooded and offline for months. I'm not going to read stuff at the bottom, but this ultimately had national scale impact. It basically shut down the flow of natural gas and oil into the U.S. And distributed around the U.S. That drove up energy prices, which affected consumers everywhere. So these are some of the connections by which sort of our understanding of the physical environment in terms of a hurricane actually affects society at a local level. And we all saw images of like these in the wake of the storm, and basically wreaked havoc on a lot of fairly expensive infrastructure. Again, understanding the similar situation, and what's interesting from these types of events is, from my perspective, I would argue that these events really kick-started this current discussion we're having around resilience in the United States. For a particular reason was, for the longest time we thought about climate change as this long-term distant issue. There's a big priority around that, but the way these events were showing, a lot of vulnerability, exposure, and consequence right here in the present day, even to natural variability in the climate system. We can have a debate about to what extent these events are influenced by climate change. We'll have to say that for another day. And so the question becomes more not just preparing for the future, but also how do we make ourselves more resilient right now? Okay, so a very different type of event. So you might remember a few years ago, pretty warm summer, pretty extensive heat wave coupled with job conditions across the South. So that's figured on the bottom left there, it shows for temperature anomalies across the U.S. So it was hot pretty much everywhere. And what these data are basically looking at are sort of energy prices, wholesale energy prices during that summer. So the plot on the bottom right shows the day-ahead prices for electricity. So this is essentially what people are paying for electricity tomorrow on the wholesale market over some period in June. And this is for a regional market in the Northeast. So what you see is these two spikes over the time frame. This is basically entirely due to weather and very high temperatures anticipated due to weather forecasting, which is again how our science information enters into these sort of economic metrics. And so obviously, higher temperatures drive energy demand, increases demand for electricity, and it's a supply and demand situation. So that drives electricity prices, which also that second spike There are multiple utilities in the same regional market. Essentially, the utilities are all paying different prices for electricity, which suggests that there's congestion in the transmission system. Basically, there's an indicator of not enough electricity in the system to meet demand. So here we have an economic indicator that affects how much a private company is having to pay on a given day for electricity, but it is tied back to the physical environment. So another type of data and indicator that is useful to think about, and useful to think about how we integrate that with weather information. What we've also seen is that sort of impacts on the electricity system have generally been going up over time. So the bar chart there on the left just shows sort of the trend overall in major electricity outages around the U.S. Over the past 59 years. And generally it's going up. And the reason why it's going up is largely associated with weather events, so extreme weather events. So is this a sign of a changing climate? Is this a sign of the aging of the electricity grid? It's becoming more fragile. We can have a debate around that. But this kind of outage information is reported routinely by utilities to the Department of Energy. So you can go back and get these data online. The interesting story about this is another story about data innovation. Right? So you can go online and get this tabular data, and it'll tell you this particular market on this particular month experienced an outage, the number of people affected, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll say this was caused by weather. Right? But okay, what was the characteristics of that weather anomaly? Well, we don't know, right? Because our weather information is disconnected from that type of impact information. There's two questions around how do you make these data interoperable? So it'd be nice to have sort of a consistent time series where we can relate what's happening with the electricity grid to what's happening with weather systems. But that's a bit of an issue for at this moment in time. So an example, so what I've done here is pull out one event from Texas back in 2005 for a spring storm event. So we had, a quarter of a million people that lost electricity during that event. You can pull that out of DOE records. But what I've done is sort of overlaid reanalysis data from North American regional reanalysis, pull out the rainfall on that day. And so what you can see is that outage coincided with a pretty big extreme rainfall anomaly that coincides spatially and temporally with that event. So when you start doing these kinds of interactions, you start to ask questions around what types of extreme weather events in our historical data are associated with these types of outages over space and time. And again, we have sort of interoperability problem, which we actually have to do a lot of work in order to link these two different types of data together. But there's potential value in trying to do that. Okay, so looking to the future, so where we head is the energy sector broadly is affected by trends in a couple of different domains. So one is changes in sort of the policy and regulatory environment. And I've done some actually around talking to utilities about how they think about the issue of climate change. And often that's the one they're really worried about, right? So things like changes in fuel prices, which is a big driver affecting fuel switching from coal to natural gas, which we've seen in recent years. They're really concerned about carbon prices, which would be a game changer in terms of the investments they make going in the future. Rates of technological change is a big factor affecting water use on utilities. So switching from the types of cooling technologies that use large amounts of water to those that use small amounts of water helps insulate utilities from drought and sort of climatological anomalies. And then things around consumer prices, which affects demand. So they're trying to manage all these kinds of issues. In the meantime, on the sort of climate weather side, that affects system reliability. We talked about water availability, about damage to infrastructure, and particularly how do they justify to regulators making investments in, say, infrastructure hardening or increased resilience. So why do they demonstrate a cost benefit of actually doing work, have done work for year over the past years, and how energy utilities can make that case that the benefits of making investments to anticipate future climate change actually makes sense from an economic standpoint. And there's just issues around public safety, and I've got some anecdotes around that, which I don't have time to get into, but feel free to ask me. So these are the kinds of things that utilities are actually trying to deal with. And the question becomes one of how can they use data and information to facilitate that. So one quick example, so this is a capability you might be familiar with a bridge called VERDI, which stands for Visualizing Energy Resources Dynamically on Earth. It was born out of a 2003 blackout when emergency managers were learning about what was happening with the energy grid by watching CNN and other news networks. And so that didn't go over well with the Secretary of Energy. So we developed this capability, which plots essentially the grid, utility markets, and distance transmission in space in real time using the proprietary data feeds coming from energy utilities. It allows us to look at what's happening with the energy grid right now, where the electricity is flowing, where there are outages, how many people are affected. It allows us to do projections of when there is an outage, how long it's going to take to bring it back online. We can do strategic planning for where we need to position emergency manager resources in order to get it back online more quickly. So that's something that's sort of up and running, and that we're sort of using routinely, particularly in response to things like tropical cyclones and hurricanes. We're moving into the future. It's thinking about energy water and how it can use data analytics to help us build an understanding of the connections between energy use and water use and availability, particularly in the United States. So we're developing more references in the Energy Water and Access Knowledge Discovery Framework, and this is being funded by the Department of Energy Office of Science. And one, I do a couple of things. So the initial launch of this project is one, develop a data analysis environment, web-based data analysis environment, not just for us, but for other users. And we want to build it up and test it with a number of use cases, which we're trying to develop with the communities, and not just among DOE, but with a range of other agencies and stakeholders. And that cycle on the right is sort of our thinking around this. So we're starting with the sort of community engagement component, which is we're going on figuring out what are the questions, what are the needs in the energy water space. That's sort of giving us information on what the key science drivers that are going to affect system development, what kind of data are relevant, and it's a lot, right? Because it's climate, it's weather, it's population, it's infrastructure, it's water availability, it's water use, topography. So we're trying to figure out how do we, facilitate access to all of these different types of data, without necessarily bringing them all to Oak Ridge, because we don't necessarily own all these data, but we want to make them accessible and interoperable. And building up a framework that enables that. So this is stuff we're gearing up to get started on. By the way, with partners among other national labs and also the university environment. I think I would focus here not on the figure that talks about some of the capabilities we're trying to develop, but talk about some of the challenges we see. So one is just a data availability question. So my guess is we're going to have to build up new data sets to address some of the questions that are being asked. We have to figure out how do we handle the distributed data problem in the sense that, again, we have lots of data assets held in different agencies with different provenance and ownership and responsibility and jurisdiction, but we want to be able to figure out how to bring them together. Disparate data is the big problem. So we have raster data, we have vector data, and CDF, spatial information, all the different sort of spatial and temporal scales, and we have to make that interoperable. And it's not stuff I'm out to do, I can assure you. But it's pretty smart people that are really interested in tackling those problems. Just for users who actually use this as just researchers or other folks, practitioners. Obviously, different with different data comes different data volumes, and ultimately we want this to be a reliable system, stable, that people can count on. It's not going to go down notice interrupt people's planning and research and operations. So it's finally just a kind of a case study that we're contemplating for helping build this out. So thinking just about hotspots for water constraints, which is a particular concern of energy. So we're trying to identify where and around the United States we're going to have these sort of hotspots for water resource constraints. How can we identify those? And that requires bringing together data on population, demography, how that's changed over time, water use, temperature, energy demand as a subset. And then when they think about all those maps, it shows these sort of scale differences across all these different data sets. And again, how do you reconcile that to address the questions that you want to address? So that's the type of problem where we want to use earth science information analytics to address. To find sort of summing up and raise the final point. When we think about the usability of earth science information, the example I just presented is one where we're trying to develop a capability to address certain questions which could hopefully be useful. We have to be serious and critical about our capacity to actually evaluate the usefulness of the information. So I would argue that we're generating data and information much faster than we sort of have the capability to manage it wisely or at least effectively. So we need to be sort of critical and evaluate the investments that we're making. So not all of the attempts that we're going to make to generate benefit from earth science information are going to work out. Right? We can build a tool to solve people's problems. It turns out we fail miserably to actually do that. There's lots of examples of that. So we learn from our successes as well as our failures. And so this points to this need to sort of better integrate what we're doing on earth science information and ability to use that information with social sciences, economics. One, because these two things are sort of inherently linked to sort of human dimensions and physical environment. And two, we can learn a lot from the social sciences about how we use data, how we design management and analysis systems so that they are actually functional and meet the needs of the users. And I will stop there. Thanks. So do I say or do I run away? Sure. I try. How you doing? Okay, I have a question about the extreme event database that you're looking into. We're working on, we've done some work with some electric utilities on a telecom last week with one of the utilities in West Virginia. They were talking about the flood. And the emergency manager for the utility said to me, if we knew any idea that this flood was going to be a 100 or 1,000 year flood, he said, we have generators that are located well above the river. So is there any way that the Weather Service could tell us, look, there's an extreme event possible, 5%, 10%, 30%, 50% chance where we could have protected a lot of our generators and substations and things like that. Because he said we've never seen a flood like this in this part of West Virginia. And so it's just making me think of the extreme event database and the discussions we've had in the past about how can that extreme event database somehow be linked to the National Weather Service's forecast to spit out the likelihood of this extreme event happening, to ratchet it up a notch for a utility to say, okay, we really need to pay attention to this. We need to take some precautions, or it seems like all these extreme events are all very surprising to everybody, and they're more extreme than they ever thought they would be. I'm just wondering how we might be able to link the work that you're doing with NOAA and the Weather Service and maybe some of the remote sensing and vulnerability work that projects within NASA might be doing. So there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in there. It's a great question, and it's the extreme investigated base. This is another initiative we had at Quadrant National Lab. Again, we try to pull information from, I guess, across the federal agencies together around particularly extreme weather, which can be a resource for the research community, but also support other things we want to do in terms of understanding consequences. And specifically on the question, there's been a couple of issues there. One is sort of, what kind of lead times do we get in our forecasts of extreme rainfall and or flood, and are those sufficient to do things like move generators around? So that's one challenge. The other challenge is for forecast quality or fidelity, and is it sufficiently robust that we're getting we have sufficient confidence in it that we can actually make an intervention and be confident that it's going to have a particular benefit. So you don't want to move around a bunch of generators to account for flood, and then the flood doesn't actually materialize, and you got the forecast wrong, or better than you expected, and therefore you didn't move your generators enough, or it was much lower, and you feel like you waste a lot of money. So I can't answer all of that stuff, and won't really try, other than to say, I mean, just sort of get back and just thinking about how we assess risk for these types of extreme events. Do we have sufficient historical information to make a case that says we actually understand what the likelihood of these particular events are? When we say it's a 100-year event, is it really? Or is it just because that's what our data time series suggests, right? So what's the uncertainty in those estimations? So for me, this all just comes back to the sort of risk management paradigm for dealing with these types of events and making sure we're doing it in robust ways. And the question becomes one of, how do we make use of additional types of data for analysis techniques, data integration, in order to do that, take that more robust assessment of risk.
Thank you.
Sure.
Where I live in upstate New York, we have traditional power grid augmented heavily by hydropower, wind power, solar, energy house, and geothermal. To what extent do all of these emerging energy alternatives play into what we're talking about?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting. There's a sort of trade-offs, right? So, on one hand, distributed energy, distributed electricity generation is seen as a tool for most diversifying, energy supply, but also for enhancing resilience. Right? You're not placing all your eggs in one basket of the particular power plant, and you have to take it offline, and crap, you'll have maybe other ways to generate electricity. So a lot of people sort of advocate for distributed generation, and this is the military is also looked at this as a way of sort of enhancing resilience. Maybe you don't use it all the time, but certainly, this distributed can roll out when you need it. So there's that side of it. There's a lot of opportunity space there. The flip side of that is the sort of challenges of integrating all that distributed energy into the electricity grid. And I've had a conversation with folks from the Northeast about who are trying to go gung-ho with solar, but the energy utility is like, what, we weren't set up to be constantly plugging in people's houses in the grid, and they're now sort of slowing down their ability to do that. So this is where sort of opportunities are sort of running up against regulatory barriers, or sort of technological barriers. So the big headache for energy utilities is the distributed solar, for example, and who has responsibility for making sure that stuff is well integrated into the grid. There's some conflicts of interest there. Obviously, energy utilities don't necessarily want to be in position of helping people to become independent from their own, their own resource, right? So watch the space, because I think it's an interesting one, and it's cropping up sort of all over the U.S., but I think the Northeast seems to be
So one of the things that I think you started out with the caveat that volume, big data volume wasn't really everything that you were going to talk about. I think what you highlighted really nicely in this talk is the big data variety challenge. And I wondered how long it's taking to pull all of that distributed and really kind of different data together.
Yeah, well, so I don't know, my colleagues will come back and talk about that, but certainly one narrative, particularly in environmental research in recent years, has been around how much time researchers have to invest in identifying data, not just dealing with interoperability questions, but simply identifying data, getting access to it, doing quality control on those data. So that's certainly a big time suck for researchers. The other question is the sort of interoperability thing when you're actually trying to run advanced data mining algorithms on disparate data, and you have to solve that for reconciliation problems. So for this issue of pursuing energy water, I mean, so one big task is, sort of two big tasks here. So one is for what data are relevant and needed, and how do we enable access to all of those data to be systems kind of endless in sort of efficient, functional types of ways. So certainly with that. Yeah, I remember one, but I can't really go into those again. But yeah, certainly okay, so one is the access, one is the interoperability question. So we're trying to set up the first order success if we can generate a system that allows the access to disparate types of data relevant to the energy water nexus. I think that becomes a community resource that could be very advantageous. Very confident we can achieve. And this other part is okay. You give people access to all these data, and you also give them access to tools for analysis, so that they're not having to do all this themselves. So they can design a workflow, submit it, it can be done somewhere else on somebody else's server, and you just get back the results. That's another piece, and it's for me a different kind of challenge, perhaps a bigger challenge, but I guess with a real sort of opportunity space lies. Thank you, Richard Hammond from NASA. This was really interesting. I have a quick question, one plug, along with Eric Isdell from Isdell. We lead the East Energy and Climate Working Group, and I'm really happy to hear your presentation and really hope to follow up you on it this afternoon too. We're going to be talking about the integration of renewables into the grid using Earth observations, touching upon some of the questions that asked a few moments ago. We have a researcher from UNC Chapel Hill who's been working with Duke Energy on these sorts of issues. My question, though, is I wonder if you are doing any work beyond the United States or international for the Group on Earth observations, which ESIP is a participating organization and has an energy focus, and this sort of activity is I think very applicable to what's happening within the geo community as well. Yeah. So thanks to the question, thanks in particular for the plug, because I assume somebody would step up and do that, because I'm aware that there's a working group exists, but I can't talk eloquently on it. So I encourage you all to capitalize on that and go to a clock and hear more about what's going on. So in terms of globally, the Department of Energy perhaps is a bit of a domestic focus thing, is probably fair to say. So one thing that I know we have worked on is on the infrastructure side, is sort of building
out the geospatial data on energy in the grid internationally. So in addition to having sort of reliable, high fidelity mapping of generation and transmission substations around the U.S., also trying to do that for other parts of the world with some difficulty in data, things like Asia and Africa. And a lot of that building off of using remote sensing information and imagery to sort of identify that's where the actual transmission line is, that's where the generation is. So we're involved in that. That's just based on sort of building out the topology of energy infrastructure, but probably not focusing so much on analytics or interactions between sort of climate and energy at this kind of global scale. Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Excellent talk. Our second plenary speaker is John Marino. John is a founding director of the MapStory Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that sustains the MapStory.org and the user community. MapStory is an amazing open platform for organizing knowledge about how the world changes over time and space. It is an atlas of change that everyone can edit, so I do encourage you to take a look after his talk. John is passionate in helping students, educators, researchers, policymakers, journalists, and others to improve their ability to collaborate around the maintenance of the spatial and also temporal data sets across all disciplines, and also to translate those data sets into compelling visual narratives, stories that are interesting, inspiring, and helpful for the general public in better understanding of the world around them. John envisions a world where everyone's knowledge can be tapped, peer-reviewed, organized, and shared so that we all can dramatically improve our understanding of the rich past, complex current, present, and also the urgent future that we share. So let's give a warm welcome to John.
Thank you to Emily and to Aaron for having us. When we got the invitation, and I started reading about my colleagues who are doing other plenary talks, and their highly technical nature, and how amazing they were going to be to listen to in person, I thought back, I don't know how many of you are Sesame Street fans, but I was as a child, and famous one of these things not like the other. So this is your slightly detour from your regular scheduled programming for the next few minutes. Other members of our team are geoscientists. Through confessions and not, my experience has mostly been in public education. I worked at Chicago Public Schools, and then most recently coordinated a national innovation lab for the Council of Chief State School Officers, where I had the great privilege of looking around the country at what people were doing in technology, what was working, a lot of it was not, and what would be fun to do. And that journey kind of led me to what we're doing today with MapStory. As you heard at the outset, MapStory has a long ways to go, and I come humbly kind of put forward a work in progress because we're a nonprofit, we're open, we're trying to be better. But it has kind of two overarching values that before I got into the project, I thought I'd share. This was a quote actually that Sophia Liu, who's the researcher at the USGS that I saw just last week, had in a presentation, and I asked her if I borrow and steal it and share it. John Witson-Powell, who maybe you know from way back when, who led the USGS, the maps design, not so much for the specialists, it's for the people who just look at the official geologists for classification, nomenclature, and system of conventions so simple and expressive that surrender his work immediately understandable. So one of the general goals of MapStory is to try to focus on simplicity and getting big data that's highly technical in nature across the disciplines out there in a simple way. And another one that's often misattributed to Ben Franklin, but as far as I can tell, it's actually a Chinese proverb that's attributed to many different people from my time in education, which we all know, which is tell me, don't forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I'll understand. So what we've been after is to think about what would it look like to build a spatio-temporal data commons that is version editable by a global user community and able to use spatial narratives to empower learning. Some of you may be familiar with the original version of MapStory.org, which I just showed to see that we're still at it and trying to get better. The original site basically had three core foundations. One we call story layers, which is our word for just an openly licensed spatio-temporal data set. Data that has spatial and temporal attributes about any topic across any time extent. We said as we accrue those, let's let people create map stories. And map story was just a spatial narrative that used story layers of data, and then a lot of people add other narrative elements, which we've gradually thought more and more about. And thirdly, are storytellers. So everything in map story is attributed to somebody, a human being that's trying to do creative work and tell something about the world. So the first site did some fun things. Let's see if I can make this work. This is a G-Place data set that many of you are probably familiar with. That's trying to illustrate Pangea. We had a fun project with Brown that had the Center for African History look at colonization across Africa and state formation since 1884 up to the 60s when independence kind of grew across the continent. What was fun about this one was originally it was in flash format, sort of closed data format that is good for visualization, but not very open to sort of mixing and matching. And with MapStory, we were able to render it as a shapefile, to upload it, and to kind of make it open and public. So now this is a single story layer that anybody can use as part of their story. At a more sort of hobbyist level, we've had people like Nitin Gadia, who is really this brilliant guy who lives in Ames, Iowa. And his father's computer scientist at Iowa State, I believe. And Nitin's just passionate about Ames. And he had a brilliant idea trying to map out every building and every road and everything that was built in Ames since Oak Ames plotted his first house in a year that I don't know. Now, it's just a person. He's not a specialist per se, but what he did was he knew how to sort of do the work it entailed to get the data. So it was the county, and they had just GIS files going back a few decades. They had to go to the Historical Society, and he got a $500 grant to work with some historic raster maps and georeference them and try to draw polygons on top of them and load those up. And little by little, he's been building his history. Now, you all are probably looking at this and seeing all the sort of technical and epistemological errors, right? Certainly civilization did not begin in this area when no games came. There was a lot going on there before. But it's fun to see. It tells us that this took him about 40 hours of combined work time. And now he's kind of got a model for it, and he can do it things in less than 10. And he's done a similar work for over 200 cities. project, we immediately saw limitations and kind of things we always knew were going to be stuff we wanted to work on. This is an example of a project that was done in DC to map the spread of bike lanes. So in a lot of cities, as they gentrify and things happen, as we know, things happen like bike lanes. One project that took data from the city, just plotted bike lanes over time very simply, and a blog called Greater Washington picked it up. In the comment section, which I like, this Michigan map with many trails accessible to bikers. So this is a comment about how this is wrong, how maps lie. And so what we know very well is what you want to do is be agile. I think something you're recording needs to be converted. Okay, I'll keep going. Yeah, let's get it. I'm still recording. That's okay. So what I want to do is undertake a re-engineering effort, which is what I'm here to kind of brief and update you on. That led us to do two things to the original platform. To let data improve so that as people accrue story layers, as we learn new things, we don't have to actually create new data and upload them. We can go in like we've gotten used to in a Google Doc or wiki page and make it better. Secondly, to let narratives form, because the data sets I just showed you are really just time series. They don't really tell you a story in any meaningful way. So you'll see now on the web, be humble. As you go, there's a lot of dirty laundry, but it's getting better all the time. New site is up, and we'll be rolling out more aggressively this fall. But at a technical level, what we're trying to do is amass a series of open source components. So the base is this thing called a GeoNet, which is developed over the last couple of years. It's just isolated infrastructure that's coming together and getting better and better little by little. What we've done is add a GeoGate component, which allows us to do version editing. So now, just like software developers in the room that are used to the Git workflow, that lets you sort of do distributed version editing in your own space and then push out your changes when you're ready. We can now do that with just Spatial. In the middle tier, we just use existing components that are common across the field with GeoServer as a place to do transactions on spatial data, and the Django infrastructure for doing basic account management and using OGC compliance standards. So that's under the hood. What let's just do in the public is things like this. Imagine we have a user named Marco Polo who's uploaded a data set that shows the spread of United States over time. And you go in and hit the magic edit button, and you just want to see these states form over time. And when you get to 2016, you realize somebody in Radon has added a state that clearly hasn't occurred right in the middle of the United States. It looks a little bit like Saudi Arabia, plotted right in the middle. And so you say, Ray, what's the deal? You zoom into this feature, and you can either delete this feature, you can edit it, you can create a new feature, and you can engage in sort of an editing process with Ray. If you like the story layers that you find, or maybe you don't know anything about data, maybe you're a middle school student that's assigned structure rigorous geospatial narrative using data sets compiled by professional earth scientists around the creative world, you can compose geospatial narrative. We spent a lot of time thinking about what would be the modular structure of the geospatial narrative. If we were to kind of unpack it into a set of components, what would those be? And this is what we've come up with so far. First, just like any book or publication, you begin with chapters. And chapters for us, as I'll show you, basically allow us to create a bucket of separate timelines. So if you want to mess around with time, chapter 1 comes after chapter 2 in the time sequence. If you want to go minute by minute and millisecond by millisecond, you can play around with the time interval in line. But chapters at a baseline each chapter, you can fill it up with a set of stuff. A base map, which we draw on OpenStreetMap, and a series of open license space maps. Story layers, which are your data. One or many data layers, you can style them and contribute styles as you want them to be of your own. And then finally, you can add boxes, which just let you move around the map in space and time at specific moments in time. And pins is just a simple word for anything that's qualitative outside your story layer. So any data that you want to add to somebody else's story layer to help you compose your narrative. So you go to MapStory and you can click on Compose Story. You'll now get put into a composer. It'll ask you to give your story a name and some basic metadata. And then you'll go about creating your chapters. This is an example of what I've been trying to think about, which is mapping the spread of universities globally over time. Pretty good for an academic, group of academics. Fortunately for me, a bunch of other people on MapStory have already loaded data about the spread of universities in Africa, in Europe, in North America. So I haven't had to do a lot of new original data collection. I might see that there's errors and I want to contribute edits, but that doesn't have to be new work. I can start building chapters. I can start adding layers. I can start playing around with the base maps. I can start styling my layers. When I feel like I have them styled the way I want, I can start adding story pins. Highlighting, for example, the first historically black college university that was built because of moral act excluded that class when universities had been managed by the United States. And then finally, I can publish. The publishing interface, pull the MapStory, it kind of has a YouTube feel. You hit play, you get some basic metadata. You can see some chapter information that you added. You can see the layers that were used in the story. The chapter titles, if you want to go immediately to a chapter. Play around with the playback that's embedded on a third-party site. Just like a YouTube video or something of that nature. So we just kind of scratched the surface and we're thinking about where this can go. We've seen students do some fun things. Jonathan Davis is the graduate student there at State University. Found some nice data that was developed around what political party won every congressional race going back to I think the late 1800s. And downloaded that as some work in QGIS and uploaded to MapStory and embedded it here on an ASU site. And a few days later, the Washington Post picked it up, which kind of petrified me because it also showed me that the media doesn't have a lot of filters sometimes. But also demonstrated the possibility all of this happened in the course of a couple days by a graduate student. So that's the belabor the point. We are, as was said at the start, we've set ourselves up as sort of a nonprofit organization to do the care and feeding of MapStory and to kind of respond to the technical work of the pipeline as it grows. Our list is long and we're excited to kind of partner with folks to build it. One of the big priorities for this community is geologic work. Right now, our importer is stable at about 290 million years before common era. We'd love to get all the way back to 4.5 billion. It involves a refiguring of some of the geotools work that we rely on for our importer. Really doing a better job with remote data streams and live data. Getting to elevation and more before need rather than living in flatlands. More charting and graphing so that we can connect basically descriptive data with some more analytical statistics in the stories. And then getting better with storytelling templates so we just feel like we scratched the surface with what's actually a narrative we need, which involves a lot of work with folks in the social sciences community. As was mentioned in the previous talk, what do we mean excited to be here and some of the talks going on throughout the conference, and would love any of your comments, criticisms, critiques. So thank you so much.
Hand back here tonight.
I'm so struck by the use of the map at the time, which of course was always something that was riveted, right? Even if we ever flip through maps in a very old-fashioned way, so that's very interesting. But I'm curious, the screen recordings you showed, there was a lot of moving back and forth across time. I'm wondering how that contributes to the story, because the traditional story has a flow unless you're moving back and forth through time. I'm sort of curious what the experience is so far with that, the effectiveness and what people do. Yeah, it's so the biggest, challenge that we've had, and what's sort of maybe forced the project to take longer than we all wanted to, was this notion of time. The whole thing that launched the chapter effort is that people became clear people wanted to jump back and forth in linear sequence of time, and our old model for the time slider really didn't allow for that. And so that has to open up a whole can of worms with what do we mean when we say time. The original assumption of MapStory is that everything happens somewhere at some time, and all we were doing is creating a data commons for attributes that at a time and place extent. But when we get to storytelling, obviously very ways we tell follow a linear temporal sequence. Also, dealing with Cartesian time, minutes, seconds, hours, it's a bit limiting as well. We did a talk recently. We got asked about Mayan calendars, and that kind of blew everybody's minds as well. So I think, not to answer your question, but just sort of a reflection, we haven't kind of gotten it right yet, and nothing can really. Once you set limits, you're by definition ruling things out. So we've kind of taken the approach that not to use kind of other gimmicky platforms, but Twitter and some of these things limit, and that limitation kind of gives them an ability to scale. And so we've decided that a MapStory is this. It has pins, boxes, layers, and whatnot. But even within that set of components, the playback and things isn't where we want it to be. For sure. Also, the balance we've struggled with, just maybe one last thought, is around how much control do you give to the viewer? Because ideally, you want the viewer to pan and zoom and make sense of the space, but the storyteller depicts a certain way of the world, and do you want to allow them to do that? And a lot of what you saw jumping around was me and the composer kind of bouncing around. But the engineers have a debate about how much the viewer should be able to do that once a map story is published. So, there's a lot of unanswered questions about that. The story layers piece is easier. It's upload data, and it's let people kind of pan and zoom, and if they see a mistake, add a feature. But the map storytelling piece, especially with the time, is still a work in progress.
Hi, Erica Zell with Patel. I wanted to know if you could talk about the difference between this and Esri story maps. Is this sort of an source version of Esri story maps, or does it have a lot of different features?
Yeah, sure. So most people are familiar with Esri Story Map project. The way I get that question sometimes, the way I think about it for me, I'm actually working with a group of high school students in DC this summer, and we're using Story Map as well.
This has nothing to do here.
Mm-hmm.
to the mic so that they can hear.
Cool. And the way it's worked out for me working with students is actually StoryMap doesn't have such a pressure on time. So you can actually use StoryMap as just a sequence of slides. So if you want almost like a PowerPoint, that some of your slides could have maps. So I think that's one difference, is we're kind of more limiting in that respect. And two, as you suggest, we're using all open source components. In MapStory, all of your data has to be openly licensed if you share it out. Et cetera, like that. The base maps are things like OpenStreetMap. There's a little bit of a different sort of component set. The tool, it's the emphasis on time, and then I think a little bit trying to accrue something into a platform. So rather than just publishing out a link, we're trying to kind of create a one-stop shop where searchers can actually just go and see every map story ever made, which I think is a little bit different. But they're definitely complementary tools, for sure, and I use StoryMap all the time.
Any other questions?
Hi, interesting talk. It's amazing. You could put everything. This could be the story of everything, all the way back 4.5 million years. I'm just looking at your website, which is great, and looking at your sponsors, and it's quite a motley crew of sponsors.
Yeah.
But you do have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and in a state university sponsoring you, as well as Spatial Networks.
Yeah.
And, the motley crew includes the DC Public Libraries. So how did they find you, or you find them? And could you tell us a little bit about how you're funded?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think you described it pretty well. I think the original sponsorship, as I was just getting involved in the project, did come from the Army Corps of Engineers, the ERDIC, which is the Engineering Research and Development Center. And as I've come to learn, they have a long history in funding GIS. They funded the original GRASS, which I've watched a great video with William Shatner that sort of describes the GRASS system, which is a pretty fun watch. And they were interested in sort of our desire to take open source tools and think about temporal, social, and narrative. So mapping change over time, the interoperability and interaction, and then the storytelling. So they invested in a grant to help some of the original engineering. And then we've sort of been building partners as we can. So the DC Public Library one was fun. They actually have a room in the MLK, the main branch, that has 8,000 maps that they haven't even cataloged, let alone digitized, let alone referenced, let alone shared out. So we did a small cooperative agreement to kind of do that, to look at that and think about how could we support raster upload in MapStory. And then other sort of corporate or individual partners that have come on. So it has been a motley crew. Yeah. Thank you.
While Aaron is setting up the computer, I'll just introduce the next plenary speaker, our last plenary speaker today. Alan Prager. Alan is a bright marine scientist and an accomplished author, widely recognized for her expertise and also ability to make science entertaining and understandable for people of all ages. She has been working for many years to create an approach in teaching science through storytelling. She has truly mastered the communications of science through fictional characters of kids that go on adventures while discovering and dealing with real science. She has also conducts science lectures on board the cruise ships and take those fun seekers underwater for adventurous discovery below the sea surface. Ellen is a celebrity who has appeared on a lot of different entertainment news shows like the Today Show, NBC News, Good Morning America, CNN, Fox News, CBS Early Show, Larry King, the Weather Channel, and in shows for the Discovery channels. You name it, she's tried it. She currently works as a freelance writer, consultant, and science advisor to celebrity expeditions in the Galapagos, I can't say that word, islands, where I happen to be vacationing later this year. So I can't wait to seek advice from her, though that's not the reason why she was invited to join us today. Ellen's constant thinking about how science can be more engaging through the creative communication and visualization is really the reasons that's brought her to us today. So as ESIP strives to effectively communicate science results to decision makers through real storytelling with real science, hopefully we'll get some ideas from her talk today. So thanks for joining us, Ellen. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm not so sure about the celebrity part, but I appreciate the thought. I want to thank you for the invitation to come by the organizers, and also I want to thank Dave Jones, from Storm Center, who I have collaborated with in the past, although I'm not sure if it should be a thank you or you owe me a drink later. With the increasing digitalization of our world today, clearly there are huge opportunities with regard to big data, but there are also big challenges. And one of those areas is in communication. And you're talking to your peers, you're talking to the public, stakeholders like, say, disaster response organizations or natural resource management. It's really important that we customize our communications for those groups and make it engaging. I have to be honest with you, after I agreed to do this, I had the moment of what the heck was I thinking? I don't know very much about data, big data, but I can learn. So it was a great exercise for me, and I sort of realized that, in fact, we could all use my ignorance as an advantage. And so I can help you with my experience in terms of communicating what works, what doesn't with broad audiences, but I'm also sort of one of the audiences you might be trying to reach and help to understand and learn about big data. So maybe I can give you some real-world feedback. Your work comes at a really important time in history. Maybe more than ever, we need not only earth science, but really effective earth science communication. We are facing some of the most critical and world-changing problems today, but we're also in a period where science has been brought into doubt and the trustworthiness of scientists has been questioned. And so I wanted to just say a few words about this because I want to commend you and urge you in what you're doing, because it is such an important time in this. And if you look at the bottom two lines in this image from a 2015 survey by Pew and AAAS, what you see is that 59% of the public respondents on the survey, they didn't see the need or the problems with growing world populations and adequate natural resources. 59%. The bottom one talks about climate change, which we all obviously know, and only 50% of the public respondents believe that climate change is mostly due to human activity. That's both alarming and depressing. And so the question is, where does this lack of understanding and lack of trust come from? There are a couple things here. One is that people don't necessarily understand the process of doing science and how it changes over time. And then, of course, there are a lot of conflicting messages that they're receiving in the media. And I will say that this is one of the reasons why I work with the media, is to try and improve how they're communicating science to the general public. I think it's really important. And I guess this is very timely right now. And of course, ideology in politics has played a huge role. Science is being judged by those who would sound mistrust of scientists and science for their own agenda. And I didn't even need to put the names for the quotes here because I think you all would recognize where a lot of these come from. But the difference between science and belief, as well as politics, is being blurred. And I think we can all agree science should be nonpartisan. So effectively communicating the benefits and results of using big data in earth science is ever more critical. So the first question is sort of, how do we effectively reach audiences that have little understanding of science? They may have a lack of trust and little knowledge of what big data is and how it can help humanity. So I decided, what is big data? How do you define it? And I did a lot of research on this, I saw a lot of different definitions, and I found this one that I think it's pretty simple, but it explains it, this quote about what is big data. And I want to point out with this slide a very important topic for the science community, and that is that we need to get rid of this whole concept of dumbing down. Dumbing down is a very condescending way of talking about taking complex science and putting into simple terms that anybody can understand. And just because you make something simple doesn't reduce its value. It doesn't change the credibility of the science. And so we have to recognize that simple does not equal dumb, and that sometimes it's very difficult to take very complex topics and make them understandable in a simple way. Visualizations, I think you guys have been talking about this already, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk over the next few days about visualizations. They are sort of the lifeblood of what you're doing with showing the results of big data. And some visualizations, like this one shown here, are inherently understandable and you get the message. And this is a great visualization from NASA and the new climate projections, and I'll also say it's frankly fairly alarming. But just in that picture itself, we get a really strong message. Now, that's not always true with visualizations when it comes to big data. These are lovely pictures, but as a non-expert, I have no clue what they're trying to tell me. And so what you really have to think about with visualizations is, what is somebody who may be a non-expert going to take away from it? Again, really pretty, but I have no idea what they're trying to tell me. So the effectiveness of audience understanding will be based on our ability to show and explain the results. Okay, so we need Pokemon Go for climate change. Who can come up with that? One of the really important things that you can all do when you're communicating with different types of audiences is figure out who they are. Who is your audience? What do they understand and care about? And how is the work that you're doing relevant to them? So when I'm talking about different audiences, I'm talking about things like your peers, obviously students, the public, industry, or specific targeted stakeholders. When I'm writing a book, a blog, when I'm going on television, one of the questions I'm continually asking myself is, who is my audience, and what are they going to understand, and what are they going to care about? So I can't emphasize this part enough. When you're talking to the public or somebody sort of outside of your expertise, keep this in mind. And here, there's my list, but so here's an example for you. When I was the chief scientist for the Aquarius Reef Base, I had the opportunity to work with congressmen and senators, and it's not about what I wanted from them. It's about what I could give to them. For instance, how will the nation benefit? How will their constituents benefit? What are their personal interests? And how can I make my relationship with a congressman win-win? And so obviously, because I was the chief scientist for the world's only undersea research basin, or only research station, I had an advantage because I could take my congressman diving, and that was a really good way to get them engaged. But I didn't just take them diving to the undersea lab. What I did is I set up events where they could participate and involve their constituents. So for instance, this is a congresswoman from Florida, and we took her down and we either hosted a media event, so she got to interact with the media and talk about her interests and her constituent interests. I also took legislators down and we did distance learning events into schools where the congressmen or senators could talk to the kids about their interests, politics, science, whatever. And so these were win-win situations because I was gaining the support of these politicians, but they were also gaining from it as well. So again, this is where I'm talking about, I was really thinking about the audience that I was working with. Another critical thing is identifying your message. And it's so easy. You guys have so much information to bring to the table that you have to really prioritize. So if you're talking to the media or if you're giving a talk to the public, you have to wean it down to just a couple simple messages. And I know that's really hard, but it's very important to prioritize what your messages are. And I put up here, be upfront. I once got a question. I was giving a talk about science communications at a scientific institute, and somebody said to me, but if I go on air or if I'm giving testimony to Congress, how do I make sure I don't get cut off before I get to my main point? And I think he was a little surprised when I said, just talk about that first. Because as scientists, we're trained to give our methods, give background, our methods, our results, and finally, at the end, we get to our conclusion. But when you're talking with the media, with Congress, a potential donor, it's really important that you give your message up front as the hook, or you get them engaged that way. And that way your message doesn't get lost because, yeah, you might get cut off. So be upfront about it. And the old soundbite. Don't be afraid of the soundbite. The soundbite doesn't mean that you have to have one perfect sentence that explains everything. What it means is that in maybe 2 or 3 sentences, you need to get your message across in a way that whoever your audience is can understand. And I don't really have time right now to talk about working with the media on television, what works, what doesn't, but I'm going to be around all day. And if you have questions about working with the media, I'm happy to answer them. I will just tell you that one of the reasons now I can do pretty well on camera and television is because I've made all the mistakes possible. Everything you can do wrong, I've done it and I've learned. So now I'm pretty comfortable. And finally, again, it's this thing that you should be telling yourself all the time, which is, what's the walk-away message? What do you want your audience to walk away with? What do you want them to remember from your talk, from your blog, from whatever it is? Now I want to get back to visualizations because, again, I think they're so important. And I found a series of visualizations that I think are really beautiful earth science visualizations. And by themselves, they're really gorgeous and there's a certain amount of information, but I think combined with more information or with a talk, these are fantastic. And especially I see these visualizations as good in schools because that's a place where bringing big data to the table is really important. And so a little side note here, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the data about the need for data analytics experts. It is not only a big field right now, but it's going to be growing into the future. And so being able to inspire students to want to go into this field is going to be critical for all of us. And your ability to communicate the passion and excitement you have for your field is what's going to inspire these students to go into it. And I think there's also an issue that most earth science departments and programs probably don't have programs in data analytics, which is something that may have to change, or there may have to be sort of, a major with a minor in data analytics. So that's sort of an interesting time. But again, you're being able to inspire students to want to go into this is really important. A few more of these really beautiful visualizations that I think can be really helpful. And then I also want to say, don't be afraid, especially when you're talking to the public or students, to add a little humor. Show what data analysis can do in a fun way. And I found this one, which I thought was really funny, how to win an Oscar. And it takes the data from all the different actors and actresses who have won Oscars, and there's things like, should you play a vicar or a tart? Should you do a sex scene? And how does that play into, do you win an Oscar or not? So, throwing in a little bit of humor to show how data can be used in fun ways is a great way to engage people. I also want to talk, I'm so gratified to hear already since I've been here about storytelling. I think more and more as scientists we're recognizing that storytelling, so obviously it's been around for the ages, is a great way to communicate information. And I want to show you two very brief clips from a talk that I think does a wonderful job of using storytelling and animation together. So this is a talk at the State Department by Dr. Hans Rosling, who is a world health expert. Two short clips. Let's hopefully they're going to work here. No. Can we get the sound back there? We had it working earlier. What was that? Seconds, because the second clip is really good. It would be a shame not to be able to see it. Yeah, the audio, it's in here. Should we try one more time? Okay. I got it already.
Let's try this.
That was in there before
Yeah.
it was working.
Well, I think, I'm not sure what's going on. Let's go back.
The students are right. The world consisted here of one set of countries
Can you guys
over
hear
here,
that?
which had large families and developing world. And they had one set of countries up there, which was the Western world. They had small families and long life. And you are going to see here the amazing thing that has happened in the world during my lifetime. And then the developing countries applied soap and water, vaccination, and all the developing world start to apply family planning, and partly to USAID, who helped provide the technical advice and investment. And you see all the world moves over to a two-child family and a life with 60 to 70 years. But some countries remain back in this area here. And you can see we still have Afghanistan down here. We have Liberia, we have Congo. So we have countries living there. So the problem I have is that the worldview that my students have correspond to reality in the world the year their teachers were born.
So this is my favorite part of this talk.
See what Sweden have done. We used to boast about fast social progress. That's where we were 1900. 1900 Sweden was there. Same child mortality as Bangladesh had 1990, though they had lower income. They started very well. They used the aid well. They vaccinated the kids. They get better water. And they reduced child mortality with an amazing 4.7% per year. They beat Sweden. I run Sweden the same 16-year period. Second round, it's Sweden 1916 against Egypt 1990. Here we go. Once again, USAID is part of the reason here. They get safe water, they get food for the poor, and they get malaria eradicated 5.5%. They are faster than Millennium Development Goal rate. And third chance for Sweden against Brazil here. And Brazil here has an amazing social improvement over the last 16 years, and they go faster than Sweden. This means that the world is converging. The middle income countries, the emerging economy, they are catching up. They are moving to cities where they also get better assistance for them. Well, the Swedish students protest at this point. They say this is not fair because these countries had vaccine and antibiotics that was not available for Sweden. We have to do real-time competition. Okay, I give you Singapore, the year I was born. Singapore had twice the child mortality of Sweden. It's the most tropical country in the world, a marshland on the equator, and here we go. It took a little time for them to get independent, but then they started to grow their economy, and they made the social investment. They got away malaria. They got a magnificent health system that beat both US and Sweden. We never thought it would happen, that they would win over Sweden. All these.
So, that's a fantastic example of using graphics, animated graphics with storytelling. And if you're interested in the graphics. They're open access, and you can find them at gapminder.org. And I believe that there's an improved version. They're beta testing an improved version. So again, that's gapminder.org. I also want to talk about, if you're giving talks, something that I think works really well with the public, with students, is to make your talks interactive. And I've kind of gone the full extreme from just standing up and giving talks. I've been creating customized trivia game shows. So ocean trivia, shark trivia, and I've done them at nature centers, at science centers, on cruise ships. And the whole idea is that I can actually get a lot of the same information that I give an audience in just a pure talk through an interactive game show. And so this was one of the people's favorite questions, and that's actually, we have talked about innovation or trying to be different. I have a fiction series for middle graders, and one of the books came out. I did an underwater reading at the Florida Aquarium in their shark tank. And so that's me sitting with my laminated book for my underwater reading, and of course there's a big audience in front of me. And so one of my questions is, what type of shark is hanging out over my head? They sort of liked my reading, I think. And of course everybody likes the I want to eat Ellen shark. You guys all know what kind of shark that is? Sand tiger shark. It's a sand tiger shark. And the kids were so funny because I also had an open mic that I could go talk back and forth with the kids outside of the aquarium. And of course, the question I always got was, how come the sharks aren't eating you? And my answer is, because I taste terrible. So are there any teachers in the audience? A couple, maybe a few. Well, I put this next slide in for the educators and teachers, especially anybody who deals with K through 12. Because whenever I give talks in schools and things, I always get the question, megalodon. And this comes out of bad communication. The whole fake mockumentaries on television that unfortunately our kids, and I have to say some adults are true. And they always ask me, what about megalodons? What about, no megalodons. And of course, after I've answered that question, I get mermaids. Another way to engage your audience when you're talking to the public or whoever is to add snippets of interactivity into your talks. And I give a talk about marine life and ocean issues, and I used to say, I used to actually tell my audience what my top 5 pressing ocean issues are. But I got away from that, and now what I do is I play, let's play Family Feud with the 5 top pressing ocean issues, and I have a dialogue with my audience. And so they, instead of me telling them, I say, okay, you guys, what are going to be my top 5 issues? And it ends up being this great dialogue because, so for instance, somebody may say oil pollution. I said, oh, you're right, pollution. And then somebody says plastic. And I said, well, that actually goes under pollution. And then somebody say ocean acidification. I said, well, that's part of climate change. And then we'll talk about climate change. So it's a dialogue that gets the whole audience involved. And it's not the whole talk, but it's just portions of the talk. And I think it's a really great way to get your audience involved. And also, with today, especially in academic environments, there's so much technology for audience participation that you can do a lot of this with your talks. And finally, I just want to reiterate sort of my tips for success for science communications. And again, it's know your audience, identify your message, use effective visualizations where you come away with what the message is going to be. Please use storytelling. It's really effective. Action, think about what's relevant to the audience you're talking to. And, I don't recommend everybody use humor because you are taking a risk. When you try and use humor and, you see this deadpan audience, it's hard. But if it works, it's great. And I will say that sometimes I use humor and the audience, nobody laughs. And then they come up to me later and they say, oh, that was so funny. And I thought I had bombed. So it is a risk, but you never know. Sometimes, especially with a certain age kid, like teenagers, they don't want to show emotions in front of their peers, but they'll come up to you later, oh, that was really good. So it's kind of a risk. But again, these are fairly simple things, but it's not what we're trained in as scientists. And so you have to think of them. I have to think of them every time I'm writing or I'm giving a talk or I'm going on television. These are the things that I think about. So thank you very much. And be time. Maybe we can have some questions. And I should say, while she's bringing the mic, this photo is just for you. Those are Nazca boobies from the Galapagos.
So my name is Brian, and I grew up in Singapore. So I live and work in Washington, D.C., where part of my task was actually government relations. And so the question here is, talking or speaking to decision makers and legislators, yes, the easiest method, of course, would be if you could get an audience before the entire House of Congress or the Senate chamber, and you do a presentation like that, and you use humor. But clearly, that's not possible. So what is your advice to folks here, actually, who would like to make that connection to their legislators?
Yep.
And how would you advise them? You clearly are not, you do not have a all attentive audience that you can capture at one point in time. So would you advocate for a more distributed strategy, and what would you say about that?
I would say I would just give you two strategies. One, and I think most people know this, is that you can make Hill visits. You can set up an appointment, whether you talk to the congressman or senator themselves or their staff. So you can make Hill visits. But another thing that works really well, there's a certain period of time when those politicians are going to be in their home states. And so if you want to talk to your legislative, call the staff, invite them to your organization to have a breakfast meeting and learn about what you're doing, all the really cool things you're doing. They are very interested, but you have to be proactive. They're not going to typically come to you. So whether you go up to the Hill or you invite them to, say, a breakfast meeting to hear what you're doing. The other really great strategy I should add is that if you're having an event, don't just invite your representatives. Invite them to participate and be part of it. And that's a big difference, because I think a lot of us, what we do, when I was at the University of Miami, I was the assistant dean at the Marine Graduate School. We'd have events and we'd invite politicians. Sometimes they'd come, pretty rarely, but if we invited them to be part of the event and the media was going to be there or their constituents were going to be there, they were much more likely to come. So Hill visits, invite them to your organizations for breakfast meetings. I would say the same thing is true with the media. If you've got a bunch of stories, don't be shy. If there's some media person in your area that you respect that covers science really well, invite them to come out and learn about the things you're doing. But also, if you're having events, invite your politicians to participate and then start getting engaged with them. And with legislators, and I would say potential funders, one of the things it's about cultivating a relationship with them. So that, one of the things that we would do is say, hey, if some other ocean issue comes up and you need information, we are the people for you to call. We've got all these experts, we can answer them for you. And so you develop a relationship with them and you're cultivating it over time. So if they say, something about the ocean comes up, who do I know to call? They call you. So it's about setting up those opportunities to engage them and then cultivating a relationship over time with them. Same thing with donors.
Thanks for a great presentation. I'm thinking a large fraction of the people in this room are also highly technical or technology oriented, and I was wondering if you could contrast science communication with either technology or more highly technical topics.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Technology and technical topics are hard. I think there's a couple ways you can do it. One is the gee whiz component. With things that are highly technical, some of it is what can you produce and what's the gee whiz component of it. I think we as scientists, and I've had to learn this, is that sometimes we have to save the really technical aspects for our own community. And when you're going outside your community, you do have to make it more simplified. And I know that's a greater challenge, but I think that you're going to have to do it. But the technology part of this, sensors, satellites. There's also the gee whiz aspect, and you can show visualizations from that technology, things that we've never been able to do before, that communicate that technology itself. So you're right, it's really tough, but I think you have to think in terms of, my audience is not going to probably understand everything we're doing, the challenges it takes, but what's really important for them to understand? What are the results? Why is this different than anything they've seen before? And how will they or the nation benefit from it? So you kind of have to step away from it a little bit, I think. Yeah, that's a tough one. You're right.
One more quick question. Thanks. In the AAAS and Pew study that you referenced at the beginning, one of the great quotes that I've pulled out and used in my own science communication talks is that there needs to be a conversation, not a lecture. What do you think is the role for scientists of listening to the public?
For scientists listening to the public? I think it's really important. And I say that because one of the ways I've evolved as a science communicator is that when I give talks or when I'm at events, I'm constantly listening. Or I look out in the audience and I see, people's eyes glaze over. I'm like, okay, that didn't work. And so we should be continually evolving our ability to communicate based on our conversations with the public. And like those surveys, I think sometimes we think, here's a great example. I was on a cruise ship I'm not sure whether it was a talk or in one of my trivia game shows. I said the word climate change. And somebody did this, and I said, well, yes. And they said, well, what do you mean by climate change? And I have to tell you, I was kind of shocked. In this day and age, for somebody to say to me, what do you mean by climate change? But it was a wake-up call to me that A, that was exactly the audience I should be talking to. But B, I had to bring it down a level because I didn't realize the lack of understanding. And so that part of it is critical in seeing every audience you're going to be talking to. What is their level of understanding? What's their interest? So it is a conversation. That's a great question.
You have time for one more quick question.
Hi. So I was wondering, even when you talk to the media and you're being upfront and you're giving your ideas at point base, that is still another. It does have interpretation, and in a growing society where the media is kind of producing something that they think will get readers to bite at rather than what's actually the main points of your presentation. What would you say to using a platform like social media outlets like Twitter that have kind of been, a point of contention amongst certain academics?
Social media, the bane of my existence. I will tell you, my publishers for my books are all over me to use social media. And, I'll be honest with you. I think for some people it's the right thing to do. Some people are really good at it. They've built up a community. But honestly, for some people, maybe not. In communications, one size rarely fits all. And I think if you're good at social media, you like to tweet, you like to Facebook, then go for it. Build a community. But I don't think it's for everybody. And, one of the things I find for myself is that I find it takes time away from writing and doing some of the other things I want or need to be doing. So I think social media is great, but I don't think it's for everybody. And I think certainly the younger generation that is so used to it, it's a great tool. But I also think you have to be careful because the reaction is so fast and can be so hard with what goes out. And once you put something out there, it's out there, almost forever because somebody's got it. So, there's good and bad to it. And I think if people are really comfortable with it, it's great. I use it a little bit, but I'm honest in that, I'm not great at it. So I don't rely on it that much. But I think for some people, it's a good tool, but you need to be careful with it.
Great. Thank you for the talk. Excellent. In fact, okay, let's just give a round of applause to all three excellent speakers. Thank you so much. And we're going on for a break, and please check in with your I'm Here app, and we'll be back in at 11. So we'll have some interesting lightning talks coming up. So thanks.
So I just unplugged everything.
Okay.
Because
like,
there's no sound in these videos right now.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna this seems like it needs a whole restart.
Before. I'd like to test it. And I'm sorry. They had somebody else set this up yesterday and then called me in today.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they did.
And the setup, so it's the way it works. I don't know how it works. So this is audio input output into this, and this goes through
In here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's plug that in. Please. Because it was picking you up from the microphone.
Yeah. Okay, so now I would hope that if we passed the mic around, that they would be able to hear the mic input through the computer, right?
Yes.
House audio is coming in here.
Yes.
Audio. Hey, AV, do you know where the preference to mute on entry is? So that's us. Screen sharing. Pause for now. Okay, so you think...
I would like to play one of the videos so that I can figure out why I'm not getting sound from here.
Actually, let's try this. Let's go back to her talk, since we've already seen it.
And the students were right, wasn't that? The world consisted here of one set of countries over here, which had large families.
I unplugged it and I plugged it back in and I messed with your volume and then I realized you were using the microphone instead of that.
Well, yeah, because we weren't getting anything. So anyway.
It might have been in the time that you unplugged it. I fixed it. I just wasn't able to switch back because we had switched, but it's working now.
Okay, so you test it. So we're not recording, so I will have to hit record. Yeah, let me just start.
Christine?